Thank you very much for joining us for this legislative update call. Just to run through our agenda real quickly, we are going to start out with a basic state budget introduction or overview by our own Executive Director, Michelle Hughes, who's just going to kind of lay the basic budget framework out for us. Then we are very happy to have with us Dawn Vaughan, News and Observer State Government and Politics reporter. So she's going to be here today, and she does a lot of covering the state budget and its ups and downs and ins and outs and all that good stuff. And so I think we're really going to get some great insight from Dawn about her life reporting on these budget and other political type issues. And last but not least, we're going to be receiving a legislative update from our policy director, Tiffany Gladney, because there was quite a lot happening this past week at the legislature, even though we are yet to see any budget from either the House or the Senate. And last but not least, of course, we're always open to announcements. So welcome everybody. Thanks for joining us. And without any further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Michelle.
Great, thanks Adam, and thanks everybody for being here. This is going to be very quick. And so what I wanted to do was just some context setting, level setting about the state budget and why it's important. Lamine, can you go to the next slide? So in about a week, everybody who's an advocate and reporters are going to look like this. It's going to be 11 p.m. at night, the state budget, the Senate budget will be released. They're on their 12th cup of coffee since 11 p.m. and they are pouring through hundreds of pages of appropriations and budget provisions as they're trying to figure out what's in the budget. And so this is sort of a rite of passage for advocates, and we're looking forward to next week, hopefully, when we can begin to start drinking our 90 cups of coffee. Next slide, Lamine. The reason we do this is because the state budget is super important. First of all, there is a lot of money in the state budget. The Senate and House have come up with a target for spending of $26 billion for this fiscal year. As you all know, that is a lot of money. And the state budget reflects our state priorities. We should be investing in what we care about. So what we want to see is state investment in kids and in families and in their well-being. And we do lots of things, and people in communities and at the state level do lots of things to meet the needs of our state's children. But a big way we do that is by allocating state funds through the budget process to programs and services that support kids and families' development and health and safety and education. Next slide, Lamine. So where does that money go? We know it's important, but where does $26 billion go? So this is sort of a breakdown. Thank you to our good friends over at the Budget and Tax Center for allowing us to borrow this slide. But the vast majority of our state investments go to education and health and human services. So if you take that 39% of K through 12, then higher education, that's 17%, and you add in that 23, that is basically 80-something% of the budget is going to health and human services and education, things that support kids and families that we care about. Next slide. So in normal times, this is generally what the budget process looks like. It's a 2-year budget cycle. You'll often hear people talk about the biennium. The state fiscal year runs from July 1, so we're right at the beginning of a new fiscal year almost, to June 30th. And the goal is to have a state budget by July 1st. In the odd years during the long session is when we adopt that 2-year budget. And then in the even years, short session, we tweak it. And then what the state budget does is it allocates state funding from the general fund. And the general fund is basically comprised of your tax dollars. So income tax, sales tax, corporate tax, that goes into the general fund and that is appropriated. The state budget also allocates certain federal funds like block grants. You'll hear TANF and CCDBG. Those are also included in the state budget. Next slide. But as you all know, we do not live in normal times. And so the last full state budget approved by the legislature, two-year one in 2017 and 2018, the legislature did approve a full budget, but we have not had a full budget since then. 2019, the legislature passed a budget. The governor vetoed it because it did not include Medicaid expansion, because he said it did not include sufficient funding for education, and the legislature did not have enough votes to override that veto. So we've been without a state budget for a while. What we've been operating on is continuing resolutions and mini budgets for specific departments. And I think the big question of the year, and a big thing that Dawn is focused on in her reporting, is will we have a state budget become law in 2021? Next slide. So where are we besides being super tired in the state budget process? Next slide, Lamine. This is a very quick overview. There's lots of details on this, and Tiffany actually did a great job a few weeks ago kind of going through the details, but basically the short of it is the agencies begin preparing their requests and their budgets in the fall. It goes to the Office of State Budget Management over the winter, and in the spring, the governor comes out with his proposed budget. Where we are right now is legislative proposal. So as you heard me say, the Senate and the House have come up with a target for spending, and they are in appropriations committees right now working out their respective budgets. The Senate is supposed to go first. We're thinking maybe next week, although John may have better information on that. The budgets will go through committee hearings. House and Senate will vote on a budget, and then that budget will go to the governor, who will sign it or who won't sign it. We'll see. And that is a little bit about the process, and we'll hear more details from Dawn about that, but just to give y'all a general overview. And I think that is it for the slides, Lamine, if I'm right. Yep. Other than basic info, that this will all be available. Back to you, Adam.
Yeah, thanks so much, Michelle. Really appreciate that. And I think we can, stop the screen share. Thanks so much. And now, as I mentioned before, we're so happy to have Dawn Vaughan with us from the Raleigh News and Observer. Let me say first, and Dawn didn't put me up to this or anything, but subscribe to your local news outlets, support local journalism, state reporting, y'all. It's super important. And it keeps you very informed. It's something I've always tried to do as an advocate over the years, not only stay up with what the Raleigh News and Observer is reporting, but many other local papers are reporting. It will give you a lot of insight into what community leaders and others are talking about. So I have a series of questions I'm going to ask Dawn, and I'm sure she can elaborate on those. But first, so Dawn, how'd you get started covering the state budget?
Well, first, thanks for having me, and I'm excited to talk with you all. So I covered, shout out to anyone from Durham on the call. I actually live in Raleigh, but I covered Durham for a long time at the Herald-Sun for over a decade. So I was covering, the Herald-Sun was bought by McClatchy, I want to say maybe 5 years ago or something like that. And so the Herald-Sun, the News and Observer ended up merging. So I was covering, my most recent beat on the Durham side was local government. And I started my career covering local government in Blacksburg, Virginia. I went to Virginia Tech. And then a lot of years in between of features and other things. So something I always heard at town council, city councils were complaining about the General Assembly and funding. And so I'd been on the Durham City Hall beat for a couple of years, and I wanted to move to something else. So I actually pitched, we had some people that were leaving the politics team, and I said, I'd like to join the state politics team. And I want to look at the intersection of local and state government, because that's something that had come up so many times. So that was one reason I wanted to do it. And they said, okay, and within our team, we have different sub beats. And they said, your main beat is the budget. I said, all right. So this was about a little over 2 years ago. It was April 2019, if those of you that remember the 2019 budget process. And so my year had begun learning about Durham's city and county budgets. And the state budget is very different, as you all know, between local and state and all the moving parts. So I ended up being dropped in. It was after Cooper had put his proposal out, and it was right as things were rolling out in committee. So I was dropped in the deep end, really, of the budget. And I learned by talking to a lot of different people, to more experienced reporters on the beat, to lawmakers, to just a variety, and just on the job as far as how this process works. What you were saying, Michelle, you were saying earlier about the process and who goes first or not. That's just something they decided. Like, this is the Senate's turn. It was the House before. I don't believe that's in general statutes anywhere. So there are a lot of things like that where there's not like a guidebook, I guess, to figure out. So a lot of those things were just kind of, on the job, figuring out how things work. And this year, the spend number agreement, I'm like, well, is that written somewhere? And no, it's something that the majority party had decided. And I talked to Senate Leader Phil Berger, sometime in the past week about it. And I said, well, why don't you, if you guys don't agree on the spend number, why not just move forward? And he said, because I want a budget before October. So sometimes we think, if your background on the budget process from 2019 is thinking that it's between the Democratic governor and the Republican, majority legislature, that's not, it is what the fight is about, but it's not only what the fight is about. So it's within parties too. So anyway, there's all the politics involved, and then of course all the money and what gets funded or not. So it's fun. It's people laugh when you say, like, oh, it's the budget, and I'll joke within our politics team in the newsroom, like, oh yeah, it's budget time. But it is fun because there's so much at play, and it affects North Carolinians' daily lives. It really does. So that's one of the reasons why I like it. I have other beats too. I cover the governor now. I have a focus on state employees. And then we kind of all do a little bit of everything. But that in a nutshell is how I got into this.
Oh, thanks so much, Dawn. So let's see, Dawn starts reporting on the budget, and we haven't had a budget since then. No, I'm just kidding. So Dawn, how do you, I get, it gets, I think, very confusing, or it's a little mysterious to folks sometimes, this budgeting process. How do you track, this process of how the budget is being formed? I know you talked a little bit about that, but can you tell us a little more about how you try to track down what's really happening?
Well, I mean, the best thing is when you actually have the documents and can look at it when it rolls out in committees. Appropriations are the budget committees. And those are these long, that was one of the first, I think I covered a committee meeting before a session maybe when I moved on to the beat. And I think it was House Health, which is really complicated, as you all know, that budget rollout, and thought, whew. So that is the best way to find out, to read the documents. But anyone who's spent any time at the legislature knows that those documents are not always there, initially. And you can tell some of the priorities by bills that have been filed previously in session. So let's see, it's Friday. Was it just yesterday? All the days run together sometimes, but it was yesterday morning, I believe, that the Senate passed its tax plan. And that's a bill that, and it also has some business grants in there using the federal money, but it's basically the tax cuts, both individual and corporate. So yes, that's a bill that the Senate passed, but it's also going to be in the budget. And I asked Berger the other day, I said, before it had passed, I said, are you going to pass this and then also just put it in the budget? And he said, absolutely, that's what's happening. So there are ways to learn about what's going to be in the budget in a big way like that. And the Senate Finance Chair, Senator Newton, presented that, I want to say a couple of weeks ago now, that this was what their hope was, to put it in the budget. So there are big obvious things like that. And both chambers have agreed there will be tax cuts. It may not look like exactly like the bill that the Senate passed, but more or less. And there are other things too, and other bills that you can tell are going to be priorities, bills that maybe passed one chamber or maybe didn't pass one chamber, but it's by someone, a powerful lawmaker. You can often tell who the bill sponsor is a very big indicator, and who the co-sponsors are is a very big indicator of, is this actually going to happen or not? And could it end up in the budget? So there are multiple moving parts. Ideally, it's the document that you find out, but there are other indicators ahead of time.
Sort of building upon, like you talked about, the tax package, and obviously the two chambers and the governor have various ideas about what they'd like to see in the budget. And we all know we haven't had a standing state budget for a couple of years. What are some of the primary, points of contention, if you're able to sort of lay out a couple big obstacles from what you're hearing to us achieving a state budget this year in North Carolina?
Well, we all know, and as Michelle said earlier, it was Medicaid expansion last time. That's not going to be the issue this time. Teacher raises were also, I remember I would write the same paragraph in all my budget stories. It was like, at the center of the budget stalemate crisis, whatever you want to call it, was Medicaid expansion, teacher raises, and then sometimes corporate taxes, because Cooper would always mention that as a priority. But it was always at the end of the line with those other things. So part of me thinks that it's going to be teacher raises, but in a different way. Everyone wants raises. Berger, Moore, Cooper, all they're fine. Everyone agrees. Teachers have had. I have, for those of you that, well, especially in education, we have our politics team has a podcast, Under the Dome, and the one that just came out today, I talked to Kern Huey, our K-12 reporter, and we talk about just the state education and what that looks like on the local level at the end of the school year. And I'd mentioned that DPI superintendent called it a dumpster fire of a year. She was doing it as a shout out to teachers. Maybe not everybody would like that phrasing, I don't know, but maybe some people would agree, I'm sure. So with that background, people are going to give teachers raises. What it's going to come down to is the amount. And Cooper has asked for big raises because everyone expects him to. The Republican leaders are not going to want that amount. That's a given. And I think with anything, you always ask for more than you think you're going to get. So the final thing that happened with the 2019 into 2020 budget drama was the series of mini budgets that were passed, and one was for teacher raises, and the governor vetoed them. I believe it was like 3.8 or 3.9% was what it would have been, more of a raise if Democrats would agree to override the budget veto. So this was drawn out for months and months. So in the end, teachers didn't get any raises. So everybody wants to give them raises for the COVID year, for they didn't get them before. So it's going to be the amount. And I think that could be a sticking point. If the Republicans want something really low, then I think that'll be a sticking point. But if it's something closer in the middle to what Cooper wants and what they think is fine, the state is in good financial shape, then I think that could be it. The other thing is, when I was talking about the tax plan, the Republican leaders want to phase out the corporate tax, and that's not something that Cooper is on board with. But whether or not that's big enough to be a deal breaker, I don't know. There's also a good chance of there being surprises in the budget. One big surprise, my colleague Colin Campbell, you're talking about where you read through the whole budget for hours. He had seen, what's this? And the DHHS budget, which was, let's move the headquarters to Granville. So that was a surprise. It didn't end up happening since the full budget didn't pass. But of course, everybody that worked at DHHS headquarters was really upset about it. And I went to a town hall that their Senator Chaudhary was talking to them about, and everyone was like, what am I going to do? Am I going to move? That's too far. I can't pick up my kids. I can't do all these things. And I'd done a public records request to find out from Granville County, what do they think about this? And they were surprised where the headquarters was going to move. The people there, it was a lot of scrambling to be like, okay, this is great. What are we going to do? And figure it out. But of course, in the end, that didn't happen. So is that going to show up this time? I don't know. At the last press conference with Cooper and Dr. Cohen, I'm like, am I going to ask her about this? But there's always other priorities of what questions to get in. So something like that is a surprise. There could be other surprises that will be the term that lawmakers use is the poison pill. that's going to do something. That said, I wrote a story, I can't remember how I described it, but just how Cooper, Berger, and Moore have been very friendly with each other this year since last time they came together on school reopening. And it's real, they're obviously different parties. They're not best friends, but they do actually want to work together. I think we all hope that everyone wants to work together for the overall benefit of North Carolina. It depends on what you think that is, So they're still on track with that. And I asked Berger, I think yesterday or the day before, because all the leaders had met, just to kind of talk about the budget process. And he said, yeah, we're still on board on this. So I think everybody wants the budget because they don't want all of that public criticism, I think, is a lot of it. And they want the funding for their priorities. So so we'll see. I'd like to say, yes, there'll be a budget. And then you can say, oh, Don told us. And we did. I like to say, no, there's not a budget. And I'm like, oh, Don was right. So I don't know. I'm optimistic.
Yeah. No, thank you for all this insight. I just have one more question, and then I know we've had some questions. We have former Senator Terry Van Dyne with us and some others, and have some questions coming in. But going back to the beginning of your comments in this section, NC Child as an organization has long advocated for closing the coverage gap here in North Carolina. And we've been hearing too, prevailing wisdom being, for example, that Medicaid expansion and whether or not that's in the budget will not play such a prominent role this time around. And I guess my question would be, why is that, or what are you hearing about that, given that some may argue it's more crucial now than it's ever been to do something like that? And you have a situation where there was this pretty intense showdown and continues to be very strong feelings around that, but it just kind of seems to be the prevailing wisdom of like, but that's not going to hold things up this time around. What do you think's changed with that?
The Senate Republican leadership does not want Medicaid expansion. It's just, they're the gatekeepers. It's just not going to happen. I say that now, watch it happen tomorrow or something. I would be incredibly surprised because they've been asked time and time again. And Cooper has pushed it time and time again. And Democrats have pushed it time and time again. The House is a little bit different. Last time, Representative Lambeth, the Forsyth Republican, said that he wanted the thing, work requirements and other things, and wanted to find, he has a background working in health, wanted to find a way to do this, and the support wasn't there on the Senate side, and you need both chambers. So that kind of goes back to what I was saying about the budget process, not just being between the governor and the legislature, but between the chamber and their priorities. It doesn't mean that they don't want to find some way for people to get more health insurance or better health insurance, but it's the method of how to get there. There was something that the NC Insider, an event they held probably a couple of years ago, with Berger and Senator Blue, talking about it. And it's just, they just have a different way of how they want to reach that goal. And I think what happened last time, Cooper said he didn't give them a Medicaid or nothing ultimatum. Republican leadership said he absolutely gave us a Medicaid or nothing ultimatum. They went back in this very formal way of official letters, they sent to each other about all this, and it went nowhere. And in the end, the state lost out with it being the budget. So I think this time, Cooper said yesterday, someone else had asked during the presser, and he said, it's still on the table, but it's not going to be part of the budget. And they said when the Republicans announced the spending agreement this week, they said Medicaid expansion is not going to be part of this, and it doesn't have to be. It can be separate. But how that pans out, we'll see.
Yeah. No, thanks so much, Dawn. I appreciate it. Michelle, were you going to maybe help guide us to some questions in the chat?
Sure,
please?
sure. We have some great questions in the chat. And one is from Senator Van Dyne, who is asking if you think there's going to be any attention to Leandro this year.
Hi, Senator. It's nice to see you. Curry Huey just heard a story. I want to say, maybe you posted, I saw a link in the chat. Maybe that was it. So he is closer on the ground of all of that. And where that stands with the funding. But I think that's definitely something that's going to be coming up in education funding, and the disagreement on how much and where. The other thing too is that there was all this, everyone seemed to like that there was going to be a bond, and when Republicans announced this week, they said they don't want a bond. And I asked the House approach chair, Representative Sane, why not? And he said they just don't think they'll, and a lot of it would be construction projects. He said that they don't think they need it. They think that there's enough federal money that they don't want to do the bond.
Great. And another question here from Tiffany, our Tiffany. This year's budget process does seem different than prior years. Would you say there's been more transparency or more closed door decision making this session?
There's never more transparency. There's a bill about transparency related to the state employee personnel records going up, and transparency comes up in lots of the names of things. From my perspective, no, the state legislature is very, especially coming from local government. I remember I would get the agenda for like a Durham City Council work session a few days before, and thinking to myself, why isn't the presentation, attached to it? And then over at the legislature, the PCS, which is the community substitute, which is basically of taking what a bill originally was and maybe changing it a little bit, maybe changing it entirely. And they've just, because of the COVID remote era, they've started posting that online with the documents for the meeting. But a lot of times it's just a printed piece of paper that's in the room that I have to go get from one of the lawmakers, or if the sergeant at arms have a few. So that's me as the reporter covering state government, trying to find information that they're literally talking about that moment. And so no, it's not, even that transparency bill that I'm writing about, the PCS wasn't available as they were talking in committee. So I went up to Senator Sanderson, who's the sponsor of the bill, afterwards, and I said, I don't know what it looks like. And he said, here, you can have my copy, and it's a printed copy, but otherwise I wouldn't have it. So no, unfortunately, it's not more transparent. A lot of it is things that happen in their different caucuses, and then it just comes out, and that's when we find out. So yeah, I'm always watching. There's always surprises.
Great. That looks like the questions that are in the chat at the moment. Don, I have a question for you, just because we have a lot of early education advocates on the call. And, this year the pandemic has really, shown a light on how critical childcare is, and how fragile that system is. And I'm wondering if you've seen a change in legislative attention to that issue. It's been an issue that hasn't really gotten the attention it's deserved for a long time. And I'm just wondering if you're seeing a difference this year, and other sort of issues that are different because of the pandemic as well, maybe.
I'm a parent. Today is my son's 13th birthday, actually. And I remember when, oh my goodness, childcare is very expensive. It's hard to get, and especially those early years too, before they're in school. I feel like early childhood a lot has been more of a Democrat priority than a Republican priority, and it's Republican majority in both chambers. So as far as movement on things, I think the childcare, the intersection with work is something that's come up. Just work overall is something that's come up. The legislature, a lot of it is about the unemployment benefits and getting people to, trouble hiring and that sort of thing, as far as what the Republican priorities are on moving legislation. But I think, so many people have said this that the past year or over a year now has, shined a light on things that were already issues, and you just see more of it. So childcare is one, work is one. A lot of, it seems like there's been a lot more, I've seen like national coverage about the work on, or the burden more on working mothers than working fathers out of this past year, which I think is interesting. And the broadband internet expansion is something that's been with the COVID money and with, other bills, and that the having to be remote and just that whole urban rural divide in North Carolina, that's something that has definitely shined. And that's related, of course, to children too. And, I have one child. What do people do who have 4 kids and 1 computer? And yes, they're the mobile hotspots, and you can get stuff through the school, but it depends on the school system. And I mean, I imagine that was just incredibly hard for so many parents this past year.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thanks, Dawn, for that. One question from Philip Belcher at the Community Foundation in Western North Carolina. Do you have any insight into the chances of the child care subsidy changes in this budget? There's a specific bill, House Bill 574, that we're doing a lot of work on, and you may or may not know that bill specifically, but just any insight on that, if you have any.
That bill doesn't ring a bell, so I don't want to speak to it unless I've read the bill. As lawmakers say, I haven't read the bill, so I don't want to talk until I've read the bill.
That is great. No, that's totally fine. And Tiffany, I think, can actually provide a little bit of an update on where that bill is in just a minute. And then I guess, Dawn, one question I have for you as we are probably closing up here, I'm looking at Adam, my timekeeper, is, as all these folks on the call are advocating for a whole range of different issues around kids and families, from food security, housing, early childhood, health, and Medicaid expansion, can you just talk a little bit about just your perspective as a reporter about how advocates need to be working with the media and what folks can do in their local communities or at the state level, just from your own background and experience on that?
I would say contact us if there's what I say to everybody, if there's an event that you're holding, if it's a press conference, if it's a panel discussion, if it's anything, let us know as early as possible. If it's something you're having at the legislative building or somewhere else, there are days where not much is going on. There are days where a lot is going on. So you have to think about timing too, with if it's the Capitol Press Corps that you're trying to reach out to. I took over a few months ago as president of the Capitol Press Corps, so you can contact me. And I can, help you get in contact with all the other press corps members, as far as making sure you're telling the right people about your event. And if it's something specific to a lot of it is I just have so many emails every single day, and if sometimes I can keep up with it, and sometimes I can't. So if you can, even the subject line of your email, because that's the first thing we see, sometimes we'll delete it before we even read it, just because, I'm talking about hundreds, and if it says something like, this bill, this issue, we're doing this, then make sure you can get our attention as quickly and as simply as possible, I guess, and make sure you're contacting the right people, find out who actually is covering the issue, and send it to maybe a couple people, since they might overlap. I'm just talking about within the same organization. Of course, you can send it to everybody. The other thing too, if there's an issue before an actual event or something that you want on somebody's radar, I would say reach out, again, kind of timing, reach out early and say, I'm with this is what I'm following. If you end up, writing about this bill, like, I'm here as this, resource. And then what I was saying about the, those committee substitute surprises, we won't know until something comes up all of a sudden if it's an issue. So that's why, contacting us as early as you're aware of something, that there's some sort of news factor. The other thing too that is harder for us to do, since as the politics team spends so much time in the building, where, when I covered Durham, people show up to city council meetings there if they have an issue. So I've got all the council members I can talk to and reach them anytime, and everybody comes too, or I can find them, you know. That's harder to do at the state government level. So if you know people, if you are one of them who have on the ground experience about an issue and are willing to be interviewed and want to talk about this, that is great. That's what we would like, especially when things happen very quickly and it's harder to do that. And that's one disadvantage, I guess, of being at the state level versus locals. You don't have, because so much is just that building, that you don't have the interactions and access that you would normally.
That is great. That is a good advice for advocates about like getting to the point, being really clear, being early as much as you can. And I know that you do have hundreds of emails and that there's just not many of you, right? That we've got reporters covering a lot of different areas, and that the easier that advocates can make it to get you the information you need, better will all be. So thanks for that, Don. That's great. Adam, I don't see any more questions in the chat, so I'm going to turn it back over to you, my friend.
All right. Thank you so much. And Don, we really appreciate you being with us, sharing your insight and information today. And we look forward to reading all these articles about what's going on with the budget process.
Thanks for having me, and newsobserver.com. Make sure you subscribe. Thanks.
Absolutely. Yep. All right. So now I am going to turn it over to Tiffany Gladney, our policy director, who is going to give us a brief summary of some highlights of what happened at the legislature this past week.
Yeah, thanks so much, Adam, and happy Friday, y'all. So as Michelle mentioned and Dawn, we now have agreement between the House and Senate on a spending amount for the budget. And this new budget agreement seemed to lift the roadblock on bill hearings that we'd seen in prior weeks at the General Assembly, because we saw a lot of activity this week with bills that either had passed one chamber and was kind of stalling out in the other, or had been on hold in either or in the other. So on the environmental health forefront, we saw House Bill 272, the revised health standard for lead bill, move this week. And this bill seeks to update the childhood lead poisoning prevention law to reduce young children's exposure to hazardous lead in water, drinking water specifically. So this bill, I'm really proud to say, has been a priority of NC Child since 2018, and actually appeared on our legislative agenda in 2018. So the bill successfully passed out of Senate Healthcare on Wednesday and is now headed to Senate Rules. And on the child welfare and safety front, we saw Senate Bill 35. This is a piece of legislation that has seen a lot of revisions since it was originally filed. It currently, in the current language, you will see a minimum age of marriage in the state of North Carolina at 16. It would exclude pregnancy exemptions and would create a 4-year age difference limit for adults seeking to marry a 16 or 17-year-old. Senate Bill 35 passed the Senate last month and was assigned to House Judiciary Tuesday of this week. So it's back on the move again. House Bill 769, the Foster Parents Bill of Rights Act, would provide a Bill of Rights recognizing the rights of foster parents. Some of those rights would include the ability to serve as a respected member of the child welfare team, receive specified information about the responsibilities of foster parents, also active participation on the decision-making process regarding the child, and to be notified of any expenses that are eligible for a reimbursement. So this bill did pass the House in May, but was assigned to the Senate Healthcare Committee Monday. On the healthcare front, we saw House Bill 665. Now, y'all, this bill is rather technical, but essentially it would provide funds to increase Medicaid per member per month capitation rate, say that 3 times fast, paid to local management entities and or managed care organizations, so your LMEs and your MCOs. The intent is to provide wage increases for direct support personnel working in intermediate care facilities for people with intellectual disabilities. So essentially, they want to align the wages with current wages paid to state employees in state-owned developmental centers. So this bill had gone literally months without any movement, any activity, but this week it was assigned to House Appropriations Committee. And then similarly, we saw House Bill 914 move. This legislation would provide rate increases to providers of personal care services or home health services, providers of direct care waiver services, and providers of direct care services in the following settings: nursing homes and behavioral health residential facilities, for just to list a few. So the bill has also been assigned to the House Appropriations Committee for hopefully next week. On the juvenile justice forefront, we saw Senate Bill 207, the various raise the age changes JJAC recommendations bill. And this bill comes from the recommendations of the Juvenile Justice Advisory Committee. This bill would modify certain provisions in the Juvenile Justice Reinvestment Act. So it would clarify the amount of time teenagers can serve in youth development centers, clarify that juveniles can be held in holdover centers before heading to adult corrections facilities, and allow juvenile court counselors to conduct child consultations and investigate complaints from children ages 6 to 9 who've been referred to the juvenile justice system. So this bill successfully passed the Senate in March. But this week it started moving in the House, and it will now be up in House Judiciary 1, hopefully soon. So with that, Adam, I will turn it back over to you.
Thanks so much, Tiffany, for staying on top of all of those details. And thing is, over the next couple of months, it's just going to get more hectic and crazy. But as you all know, every week we'll try to keep you updated on what's going on these various issues. And as always, feel free to reach out to us at any time if you've got questions with what's going on with particular policies.
Hey, Adam, we did have one question from Philip about the child care subsidy, Tiffany, the 574 House bill. Any news on that bill?
Yeah, so we did see a little bit of childcare attention last week with, I think it was Senate Bill 116 or House Bill 116, and Speaker Moore actually added an amendment that would focus on childcare subsidies. But House Bill 574 would essentially increase the state floor for subsidy rates in your childcare facilities to the 2018 level. So I like to think of it as it would streamline the rates across the state, because right now we're seeing a lot of our, you guys know I'm preaching to the choir, a lot of these rural childcare facilities that aren't getting the same amount of reimbursements as some of their counterparts in more urban or suburban areas. So we haven't seen a lot of movement in the past few weeks. However, it has bipartisan sponsorship with Representative Willis and also Representative Clemens and Vaughan. So we have been in contact with them, and they still feel pretty good about the viability of the bill. So we will see what happens. You know, I oftentimes tell people on Jones Street, we don't care if it's a freestanding bill or it's a line item in the budget, just as long as it gets done. So keep your fingers crossed on that, and keep a lookout on your inbox, because we might be sending out more action alerts in the near future.
Thanks, Tiffany. And Adam, if we have time, another question from Dr. Kathleen Clark-Pearson, Tiffany, about CHIP and Medicaid, the CHIP fold, CHIP and Medicaid basically merging into under Medicaid. Any news on that?
Yes, we are still, well, yes and no. We are still hard at work with trying to get this bill across the finish line as well. We have deployed, or employed, I should say, a lot of our partners to sign on and solidarity with us in support of this bill. So we've sent sign-on letters to several different leadership in both the House and the Senate, as well as the governor's office, just to let them know that this is not an issue that just NC Child cares about, but something that a lot of your PHPs care about and a lot of your medical organizations and medical partners. So we are hard at work, kind of behind the scenes, working with the administration as well as leadership on Jones Street to make sure that this issue stays relevant, while also making sure we stay in contact with our primary sponsors on Jones Street to make sure it stays relevant for them because they have a lot on their plates. And also making sure that if there are any concerns or questions that come up behind the scenes, we are able to equip our sponsors with the information they would need to answer those questions thoroughly.
Cool, thanks. Thanks, Tiffany. And just for folks that the wonkiness of the chip fold, but basically this would basically merge CHIP, which right now for children under 6 is already merged into the Medicaid program. This would be for kids 6 and older so that they would have access to EPSDT benefits, emergency transportation, primarily those issues if they are 6 and older, which right now they don't have access to. So for kids, particularly kids with special healthcare needs, this would really be a big boost for them and a real help. And I think, Adam, that is what I see in the chat right at the moment.
All right. Thanks again, Tiffany, and great questions. Thanks, everybody, for asking those. So before we close, I will ask if there are any announcements that anyone has. I will just say we had our discussion last week about the American Rescue Plan funding and tried to sift through some of that about how it'll play into the legislature and them having to make decisions, and then local. There's a lot of local money coming down to the counties and cities. We are working on a 2-page, some type of flyer that we're hoping will be a helpful guide for advocates across the state with some key questions you can ask in ways that you might be able to advocate and interact, not only at the state level, but primarily at the local level. So Durham City has $60 million coming in. How will they spend it, et cetera, et cetera. So we're going to be providing some more of that information and probably following that up with a webinar related to that topic for people who want to take action, so on and so forth. So I just wanted to give you all a heads up.
Yeah, and Adam, related to Philip Belcher just put something in about the tax cuts that are being proposed by the Senate right at the moment are disturbing. And one thing that I didn't say, but when I was talking about the budget, but I think is really important, and if folks are interested in having some more discussion about this, and particularly ways that you could get involved, y'all, at the end of the day, if elected officials are telling us that there's no money for this or no money for that, those decisions are made up at who's paying what taxes that go into the general fund. So backing up our advocacy to how do we have revenue and what revenue and who's paying for it and how much revenue is going into the general fund really plays a role in, at the other end, what we have available as advocates to advocate for. So I know that a lot of times people are like, taxes, and I don't want to talk about taxes, and advocacy on taxes seems either scary or icky, or we don't want to talk about it. But the reality is we have to talk about it as child advocates, because if we don't, we will continue to run into the brick wall of there is no money. Those are decisions. Those are policy decisions that elected officials are making about whether there is going to be money or not for kids and families. And so if you all are interested in some of that discussion and having some more discussion around that, if you will put into the chat, like, yes, I'm on, just so we can kind of gauge. I'm really interested in kind of supporting our members a little bit more in this area, because at the end of the day, it really ties our hands as advocates on the other end when we're fighting for kids and families. So thanks for letting me get on my soapbox for just 1 second, Adam.
Absolutely. It's a good soapbox. All right. Any other announcements? Okay, hearing none. Again, Dawn, thank you. We really appreciate it. Thanks everybody for tuning in this week. Keep an eye out for the recording and please share that with others who weren't able to make it. And we will not be meeting next Friday. We will not be having a CAN call. And we will be the week after that, the 25th. And I believe we're going to try to focus on the 25th on the budget, probably. I mean, I think we're hopeful that some type of budget will appear between now and then. So we'll see about that. But thank you, everyone, and have a wonderful weekend.
Thank you, Don.